The stitch I'm going to show you today is called a stab back stitch. It's a stitch that's used extensively in toy making, in teddy bear making. It's a stitch that we use in any curved areas that are tricky to get to on the machine. So for example, on a teddy bear's foot, any of these curved areas, little circles that we put in to our 3D sculptures. Right, so the first step, I'm going to give you an example here in felt. Now I'm also going to show you at the same time how to pin in this case a circle, into our partly sewn project. People think it's quite tricky, and I guess it is unless you have a few tips on the easiest way to do it. Now first of all, we've got our little opening here. Now remember that it's always right sides together. So we start on an area that doesn't have a seam. That's the easiest way. And we put our right sides together completely flat. It's a circle, so it doesn't matter where we begin. And here's the trick. We pop the pin straight through, about a 4mm seam allowance in this case. Pop the pin straight through, and we're going to turn our fabric over. You can see I'm going to slide my pin down straight and take just a little bit of that fabric on that side, and we're going to push the pin all the way down to the pin head. So I'm going to show you again. So we just turn that round, make sure our edges are even, and do it in fairly regular intervals too, so we haven't got any puckering. So straight through, your pin goes straight through, turn your project over and take a little on that side, pin all the way down. So now all of our pins are in, all the heads are pushed right down, our pins are sitting straight up, and you can see that there's very little puckering when you pin it that way. It also keeps those pins largely out of your way of your thread getting caught up on them. Now our next step is to do an overcasting stitch just to follow up on what the pins have just done. So we're going to start with, when we do any sort of work in construction like teddy bear work or toy sewing with a stab back stitch, we always use a really strong thread. So I've got an upholstery thread here. You can use a top stitching thread. I've just got a knot in the end of my thread, and I'm using a single thread. So we're going to start again, don't start on a seam. So we're just going to start. Now this is just an overcasting stitch, and all it is a stitch to hold our circle in place so that we can remove our pins before we actually sew our stab back stitch. So just take your pins out as you go, and it's really just a holding stitch. So I guess some people would call it a tacking stitch, but it just removes those pins for us, so when we're actually sewing our seam, we're not getting all tangled up. So go all the way around your circle. So now we have done our overcasting stitch all around our circle. You can see that that looks really neat and tidy. You can't see any obvious puckering there at all. Also, when you're sewing your little circle in, make sure that you open your side seams. Wherever you've got a seam, make sure that you open them and make them flat. So we're going to start now to actually sew the seam, which will be our stab back stitch. I'm going to use a darker colour. Obviously I would use a thread that matched exactly our fabric, but in this case I want you to be able to see. So start again just on a clear edge, come in from behind. My seam allowance is going to be about 4mm, straight through with a knot in the end, holding those two edges together nice and flat with your thumb and your forefinger, and we're going to make our stitches quite small, probably around about 3mm. Going to go straight through all the way to the back, and the stab back stitch comes back through. In this case we're going to just do a double stitch, so we're going to go back through our starting hole, back through the same first hole. That's just to anchor the stitch. Our thread is behind, so we're going to come up from behind, Initially when you first start you might want to be checking from behind. After a while you'll get a feel for it and you'll be able to just pop your needle through for your next stitch. So about 3 to 4 mil. Back into the hole you just came from. So we stab straight through. That's where it gets its name. So your thread is behind again, back through, and then back into the same hole. So the thread stitch links completely. It's probably, in my opinion, the most dependable, strongest stitch for any soft toy making, soft sculpture, anything where you're going to be stuffing. And you can pack, for example, like a teddy bear's foot needs to be packed very firmly. And this stitch is the strongest. I would, done well, I would suggest it's possibly even stronger than a machine stitch. So it's very dependable. So now you can see I have completed my stab back stitch all the way around the circle, and the stitch is sewn back and front all at the same time. So that's what makes it such a strong stitch. Now I'm going to turn this one through so you can have a look at it when it's finished. Now I've just pulled that through to the right side, and I'm just going to show you another tip very quickly. When you're making anything in 3D, get your fingers and thumbs together and roll those seams between your fingers and thumb. You can see that you're rolling it out and you're getting a beautiful curved, perfect seam for a great finish. By comparison, if we just turn it through and push it out with our needle, that's what we get. If we roll the seam between our fingers, we get that beautiful curve. So you can see that the finished product, this is actually a little makeshift pattern for this little owl. You can see that that's our little sewn in disc. We've got a lovely, clean, neat finish that can sit nice and flat. So there we go, now you know how to do a stab back stitch. See you next time.